How are you?
I'm very well. You, on the other hand, you're exhausted. You're
Well,
angry.
I
You don't want to be.
should be exhausted
Yeah,
and resentful, but
that's
in
good.
fact, no.
That's the way I prefer my subjects.
Right now, at this very moment, I'm suffering from separation anxiety because Rob and I have been on the road for 3 weeks in
Yes.
about 5 different countries, and we're finished today. I just said goodbye to him, and
Yes.
I'm really feeling it. I have
Are
to
you?
say, yeah, I am. Yeah, I am.
We had no interest in him. We just wanted you.
Yeah,
We
well,
don't
I
even
was
know
going
who
to
he
bring him
is.
here anyway, but we didn't do that. Yeah.
Well, thank you for doing this because I know it's on the tail end
Sure.
of traversing the world to promote this. This film has been called, in one review I read, a scathing critique of capitalism and the financial industry. Is it?
No, I don't think so. Because I mean, strangely, it's very philosophical, and it does make, as we heard, some trenchant and pretty accurate philosophical observations about the nature of capitalism and
Yes.
the nature of, let's say, what turns out to be the Occupy Wall Street protest movement, which is not really anti-capitalist at all. I mean, I think it's really pro-capitalist. It's just people saying, we want more of the capitalist dream and you're not giving it to us. It's not like they're communists and wanting to tear down the capitalist system. The movie is more complex than that, you know. But you can, and it is the story of one particular person, but from that comes flowers observations about capitalism, which could have come straight from Karl Marx, actually. And Marx is referenced in the movie,
Yes.
as in the book. A specter is haunting the world, the specter of capitalism. Well, Marx said a specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. So it's kind of I mean, Don DeLillo wrote this novel about 10, 12 years ago, and it seems as though the world is just kind of catching up right now.
Yeah. Yes. It seems like a particularly prescient or cogent film for the moment. But if it's being called a scathing critique of capitalism, and you say it isn't, does it bother you that it gets called that, or the perception is that
No, because I think you can draw that from it, and it's accurate enough. What I object to, and I don't really object strenuously, but I object to it being that's the label, you know, anti-capitalist movie.
Right.
It suggests that that is its purpose and that's what it does, and in fact it does a whole lot of things. As you know, you want any complex work of art to do many things, not just one thing. It's not a propaganda movie. Let's put it that way.
Robert Pattinson, who you're suffering from separation anxiety with, but he plays this opaque, emotionless, almost robot-like investment banker, Eric Packer. His demeanor creates a sense of foreboding throughout this film. He's an interesting choice. What were you looking for when you cast him?
Well, you're looking for a great actor. You know, that is a very difficult role because, yes, what you're saying is there at the beginning, but he does change. He does morph. He does. You do start to see all kinds of things as the movie progresses, because his desire to get a haircut and you know, going from the east end of 47th Street to the west end is also a trip into his past. He's really going to where he had his first haircut as a child, and you begin to realize this, that it has to do with his father and so on. And he becomes much more vulnerable and human and childlike as the movie progresses, as he sort of tries to escape from the life that he's created. So I'm looking for an actor who's got charisma, because he's in absolutely every scene in the movie, which is,
Yes.
even for big stars, that's pretty rare that the movie is structured that way. He has to be there for very watchable, and it's a lot of dialogue, really complex, some of it very technical, and all of it quite funny too. So you have to have an actor who gets all that and can do it.
I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but did you know that he could do it?
You never know if the actor can do it until you've got him doing it, quite frankly. But I had seen him in Little Ashes, in which he plays a young Salvador Dali, and that was a very extreme, difficult Spanish movie. He does it with a Spanish accent, speaking English. And I thought, no, this is a guy who's not afraid to do something really challenging and difficult. He's not afraid to play what is in Hollywood would be considered an unsympathetic role, and a lot of actors, you'd be surprised, they really don't want to do that. They don't want to be seen in that kind of light.
Right.
And
Especially a contemporary matinee idol, right?
That's right. That's right. So So I thought, no, I think he has the chops. I really thought he had them. Until you do the movie, you don't know the breadth of it. And I really thought I think he gives a fantastically subtle and beautifully modulated performance. Very different by the end of the movie to what he is at the beginning.
When you guys were at the Cannes Film Festival a couple of weeks ago, he said, Robert Pattinson repeatedly said, in fact, he couldn't explain what this movie is about. Mm-hmm. Were you consciously trying to keep him in the dark?
No, because we don't know what the movie's about. I mean, in other words, people, if you're sending an email, you know what the email's about, but art is not an email. It's just like in the old days, they say, if I want to send a message, I'll use Western Union. That was the old joke in Hollywood. In other words, what you're delivering is a kind of organic little universe. I mean, what does your life mean? What does my life mean? Well, it doesn't have a meaning in the sense of a message or so. A movie is a life. You're creating a life, and it doesn't have a meaning in the normal sense. We created Eric Packer based on the dialogue. He's in a limo. Somebody comes in the limo. He talks to that person. He's wearing a certain kind of clothes. There's no meaning necessary. The thing is that people...
Is this true of any movie?
Yeah, I think it is.
Come on. Really?
Oh, yeah.
So
because
we don't know what Bad News Bears is about?
Do you know what it was about?
Yeah.
What?
It's about a ragtag bunch of underdogs who got together and they have a drunk coach
now you're getting into plot descriptors.
They come together and they win in the end, and it's revenge of the underdogs.
Yeah. So this movie is about a billionaire who goes to get a haircut. I mean, on that level, sure, we all knew what it's about. But the thing, what Rob is really talking about is there's a feeling, a kind of a tacit understanding that you have to analyze a character, psychoanalyze him, do the Freudian routine so that you can get under the skin and blah, blah, blah. But when you think about the way people really interact, that's not the way you approach your own life, and it's not the way you approach a character, really. So I was basically saying to Rob, don't
sweat it.
You don't, exactly right. You don't need to analyze this character.
But
Just
he goes so far as to say he thought you intentionally wanted him a bit dazed. He said David quickly realized that what he liked was when I didn't have any idea what I was doing. I was sitting there completely lost and confused, and he was like, "That's the one. That's the take."
Yeah. It wasn't that I wanted him to be like that. It's just that I could see that was the way he was working, when he didn't think too much. And it's really a question of an actor who has not yet learned to trust his intuition and his instinct. And I think that was his lack of confidence, which he admitted to me. I mean, he basically was saying, I don't know if I'm good enough for this movie. I don't know if I can do this. And I was saying, no, you are. And just
when he's good enough is when he's not overthinking it.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
I gotcha.
And you find that with athletes too. I mean, speaking of the Toronto Blue Jays, for example, you get pitchers who say, "I'm just thinking too much. I'm analyzing too much. I'm outsmarting myself, and I should just throw the ball."
Back to the Bad News Bears. That was what you're
exactly right. That was my reference.
If I go back to the review I was talking about, and whether it's a scathing critique of capitalism or not, it does. There are references, and whether it was prescient and unexpected in terms of the Occupy, etc. There are references that resonate with what's happening politically in the world. You're not seen. You've not been seen as a particularly political filmmaker.
Yeah.
Why did this feel like the time?
It didn't, actually, because when I started to work on this movie 3.5 years ago, none of this stuff was happening, And on the other hand, I don't shy away from it. I was certainly fascinated by Bernie Madoff, for example, and fascinated by the destruction of Nortel in Canada. And I'm completely ignorant and, naive about economics and business and all of that stuff. But you get an education just reading about these people, and recently about the London whale. I don't mean the little baby whale that swam up the Thames. I mean the investor in London who's known as the London whale because he's moves huge, vast amounts of money and microscopically timed computer investments and so on, and has earned and lost billions of dollars and has destroyed the economies of various countries without being aware of it. And that's kind of Eric Packer. He lives in a kind of an abstracted world of finance and has lost touch with humanness.
You're shooting this film. You were shooting it in Toronto and in New York, right?
No, we never shot a photo film in New York.
You didn't shoot in New York.
No.
So when Occupy starts to happen, did it give the adventure of this film a sense of immediacy?
Well, it did, and yet it didn't really affect what we were doing at all. We stuck to the script. And it was just kind of strange. I mean, you're shooting a scene of anti-capitalist protesting in the streets of New York City, and then you go home and you read about exactly that happening in New York City with Occupy Wall Street, or
the G20 here, right?
Absolutely. And then I get a text from Paul Giamatti, who plays a major role in the film, saying, "I can't believe it, but somebody just pied Rupert Murdoch." And we had just shot a scene where our character, played by Rob, is pied by the pastry assassin. You know, so were we making this happen, or did we somehow morph from shooting a fiction film to shooting a documentary? I mean, it was spooky, and yes, it gave a kind of frisson, you know, to what we were doing. But in fact, it didn't alter the shape of the film one iota.
Let me ask you, you talked a bit about the haircut, because Robert Pattinson's character, Eric Packer, is seeking a haircut throughout this film. This film. It does. Why does something as mundane as a haircut become so important to him on what is obviously his worst day of his life? Well,
we feel that Eric woke up this morning and something was different about his life, about the universe, and something was going on, and it really had to do with him. Ultimately, we begin to realize, deciding to liberate himself from the prison that he's created for himself, which seems like a wonderful thing, you know, because he's rich, he's got a limo, he's got an amazing apartment, and he somehow is starting to destroy all that during the course of this trip back to his past, really. I mean, the haircut represents his childhood and where he was as a child, naive and innocent. Perhaps not consciously being aware of it. But he does anticipate it. At a certain point, one of his guys says, "Why do you have to go there to get a haircut? You know, you can have anybody come to your limo. He'll cut your hair in the limo, or you can go to the office." And Eric says, a haircut is what? It's calendars on the wall. It's chairs in the floor. It's like, so in other words, it's not just a haircut. It's not the process of getting your hair cut. It's really the texture of where you were as a child for him.
And he's seeking something visceral. And even though he's got everything, he's seeking something that to feel again.
Sure, because he's created this limo, which is very spectacular, and it looks normal from the outside. Because, like the London Whale, he wants to be anonymous. He's not a celebrity. Nobody. He has a bodyguard to protect, literally to protect his body, not to protect him from fans, because he has no fans. To be a financier successfully, of this type, you have to be anonymous. I mean, there are no pictures of this guy called the London Whale. Your anonymity is part of your weaponry. So it is with Eric Packer. But he's created this limo. Inside is very special. He has a seat in the center of the back that's like a throne. He is the king of this little empire. And he forces people to come to him in the limo for business, but also for sex, for information, for philosophy, for whatever, for companionship, such as it is. Meanwhile, though, it's completely silent. He talks about this. He's what he calls Prousting. He's Prousted it, referring to Marcel Proust, who wrote in a cork-lined room so that it would be silent and isolate him. And he's isolated himself from the vibrancy of the city, of the life of the city. And so in this limo, you don't hear anything. You barely see anything. But at a certain point, when he leaves the limo, he's completely, he doesn't know how to talk to his wife. He says he doesn't know how normal people interact. He says to her, "This is how people talk, right? I mean, I'm doing a not bad job of imitating a real human being."
But is the limo and the isolation, is that a metaphor? I mean, is it to suggest the super rich have isolated themselves more so than in the past?
Yeah, I wouldn't say all of the super rich, but this particular kind of guy, who lives this abstracted kind of interaction with the world of finance and therefore with the world. I don't think you want to make it too general a comment because it immediately falls apart. It's not accurate. It's accurate for Eric Packer. And in that case, I mean, I showed my crew the movie Lebanon, which takes place entirely inside an Israeli tank. And I showed them Das Boot, which takes place almost entirely inside a German submarine during the Second World War. And in a way, this limo is a submarine for him, or it is a tank. But it also then you begin to see as a prison. You know, it's a coffin for him. And he finally decides that he must break out of this.
Well, there's the physical isolation, and there's also the emotional isolation.
That's right.
That suggests again, and I appreciate that you don't want to make these sweeping generalizations, but that great wealth has made him numb to the world around him. Do you think extreme wealth can create extreme desensitization?
I think it can. I don't think it's inevitable.
Based on your own experience.
I have not had the experience of extreme wealth. I actually, can't even afford to live where I live in Toronto, frankly. So no,
you need a limo.
I'm
like
looking
a gadget
forward
limo.
to that. I'm looking forward to that numbness of extreme wealth.
But sorry, you were in the middle of a real answer, and I cut you off.
What was it? What was
well,
the question?
I think that your answer was you don't necessarily think that extreme wealth does create.
No. I mean, you look at Richard Branson, for example. He's very wealthy, but he's really decided that he wants to interact with the world, and I think he's doing it in a very interesting way. Same with Bill Gates. Yes, extreme wealth, a Microsoft fortune, but he's able to say, I have too much money. And I, therefore, need to give it away, and I'm going to find ways to interact with the real world and help people. So it's not inevitable that should happen, but it's obviously possible.
Cosmopolis is, of course, based on the 2003 novel by Don DeLillo. After he saw the film, he said, David did not move action out of the limousine for the cinematic sake of it. He brought scenes into the limousine, just as you're saying. You said the essence of cinema is a face speaking.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, people they sort of talk about theatricality in a movie, and they usually mean that there's a lot of dialogue and people talking, and they level that as a sort of criticism. I mean, the end of this movie is 22 minutes of a scene between Paul Giamatti and Rob Pattinson.
Couple guys talking.
Yeah, and it's two guys talking. And you could easily say, and some people have said, this is theatrical. And I said, no, it's essentially cinema. First of all, the thing that you photograph most as a director is a face talking. So how can that not be cinema? That's when I'm really trying to get away from the idea that cinema must be about vast sweeping spaces and stuff. Really, if you think about what we do...
Or about car crashes or things exploding?
Well, even in car crashes, you want to see what the guys say after the car crash. How do they react, or what do they say before the car crash? So the car crash itself is not enough to mean anything on a human level. That's just two, metal objects colliding. That means nothing without the human content that comes before and after. So even there, it's the faces speaking that give it meaning and emotional resonance. But
interestingly, it's the two things hitting each other, clashing, without the faces speaking, that are used to lure us used to lure masses into the cineplexes, right?
Not me. I wouldn't do that.
But do you lament, in other words, that the diminishing of the idea of face speaking? Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of Battleship or something.
Or Transformers and stuff.
Sure.
Yeah, with a lot of robots just stomping each other, which can be amusing. But it's just a corrective. It's more a reaction to criticisms or not even criticism, but critiques. The idea of cinema, we get away from what the idea of cinema. When you think of the art cinema of the 60s, with Truffaut and Fellini and Kurosawa, where there was some beautiful imagery, there's no question, but it was always the words, it was always the speaking. It's the human content. So. And I say, yeah, you could do that last 22 minutes of Cosmopolis as a little play, but it wouldn't be cinema because you wouldn't be doing close-ups, you wouldn't be cutting, you wouldn't have camera movement, and that makes it cinema.
See, if we go, I'm stuck on the limousine for a second. If the limousine is the bubble, literally protecting the wealthy elite, in this case, Eric Packer, from the masses, the 99%, you might say, who are on the outside, or at least the demonstrators. What does it take? What would it take to puncture that bubble?
Well, it has to come from the inside, you know. I mean, of course, we have scenes of this limo being rocked back and forth and all of that. But it really, it's a recognition. I mean, I think, for example, what's happening in Europe with the Eurozone is pretty interesting, because the upside of it is that people are realizing that you cannot have one rich, happy country and the rest of the world being poor and unhappy. We are all in it together. The Eurozone is really showing that. It's proving that. And it started as a pretty optimistic thing. I mean, as has been pointed out, these countries that were killing each other during the First and Second World War, you know, with total animosity and so on. And so now they're all together in this one problem they have to solve. They have to interact with each other. They have to collaborate. That actually is kind of nice. You know, money is something we've invented. I mean, money is technology. It's a human technology. It doesn't exist in nature. It's not like the tsunami that hit Japan. This financial crisis is a human thing. And it means that a human solution has to be found. So that's the good part.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a human thing.
But it is. It's
right?
totally
It
human.
feels like it's out of our human control.
But it is something that we've created. I mean, you don't get animals with an economic crisis.
Right. You talked about Robert Pattinson, the strength of the courage of taking on a role where he's not necessarily likable. A critic from Variety said, and I'm quoting, "Cosmopolis probes the soullessness of the 1% with the cinematic equivalent of latex gloves." Mm-hmm. Many of these characters are not particularly likable in the Hollywood sense of the world. Does it matter to you? Do you care whether the audience likes the characters?
No. Actually, Rob found on the internet a review of the movie that said that the movie was aggressively unlovable. And I loved that. I thought that was great. I said, yes, we are. That's what we are. The desire to be loved is really death when it comes to art. You know, I mean, because you get people pathetically desperate to be loved, to be liked, to be likable. You can't say anything true and trenchant and cutting and interesting and profound if that's really all you're after is love. I'm talking about in art, not in life. And so
the creator, though. As the creator, you're talking about now. You don't have to. But what about the characters? I mean, isn't the orthodoxy to say we have to see something in the characters that is redeemable for us to want to care about?
Yeah, I don't think redeemable is. This is not coupons at the grocery store. Redeemable is not the issue. What is interesting is provocativeness. Intrigue, if you are intrigued by the character, if you find them fascinating, if you find what they do illuminating, if you find it provokes you, that's great. None of that equals likable or lovable, I mean, there could be that too, but the chances are slim that they will all go together. So I say, well, you can't take your eyes off Rob in this movie, I don't think. And you can't not listen to what he's saying. And the people who come in are all... You have to remember that it's funny, too. I mean, the movie is very funny, as is the book. It's very dark, strange humor, but it's really humor, and the audiences do get it, even when it's translated in Cannes, for example. So it does make you question what is art, what is entertainment, and what do you look for in a movie? And some audiences who only look for something, light and fluffy and feel good, this is not the movie for them, for sure. But if you're looking for something more, then immediately you're not talking about likable. You're talking about watchable, more than likable.
If just to extend to go to the logical extension of this, or the extreme extension of it, are you saying if there was a film that was only, because we always get we identify the bad guys by contrasting them with the good guys in the film, right? So if there's a film of only bad guys, that's still an appealing film to us. Absolutely.
I mean, actors love playing villains. There's a reason for that. Very often the hero is boring and the villain is interesting.
Right, but we have a hero.
Yeah, but What about if you don't? It's even better. I mean, it's more
It's
pure.
West Side Story without Tony.
Yeah,
Get him out of there.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's even more pure. Potentially. Potentially. I mean, it really depends on the details of what it is you're watching, because you can only go so far with the generalizations.
Is it true that you only took 6 days to write the screenplay for this?
Yes, that is true.
And the dialogue, I mean, it certainly has a poetic ring to it at times, which I assume came in part from Don DeLillo's book as well. How do you find the balance between dialogue that sounds natural but also has the flair of a larger-than-life character?
Well, that's what I love about DeLillo's dialogue, and he has that tone in all of his writing. And it's really interesting that no movie had been made of his work before Cosmopolis. I mean, many of his books were optioned and they never got made because they're difficult. But that's what I love. I mean, I think of it as Pinteresque, like Harold Pinter. People can recognize his dialogue from a mile away. It is the way English people speak of a certain class, but it's also very stylized, and the punctuation is really crucial when you're doing a Pinter play. And I feel that DeLillo's work is the same, and I really wanted to hear it spoken. When I read Cosmopolis, I said, this dialogue, it would be great to take it off the page and actually hear wonderful actors speaking it. I wouldn't change a thing. And in fact, it's exactly what it is in the book. I haven't changed it.
And if somebody used to say, well, that's not the way people talk.
But it is the way some people talk. It does have the reality of American speech. And yet it's very stylized at the same time. And I think the two things going on together and sort of morphing back and forth between the two is what makes it intriguing. And it's really hard not to listen to it. And it does have a wonderful poetic thing. I mean, Rob said, as soon as he started to speak, it was so easy to speak that. Even though it's not strictly speaking realistic, it just flowed beautifully.
There's some really riveting scenes with that kind of dialogue between Robert and his wife in the film, played by Sarah Gadon. You can't take your eyes off them. There is a line in this film: everyone lives thinking they can become rich in the next 20 seconds.
Yes.
You think that's always been the case in America, or is that particularly the case now?
I think it always has been the case in America. That was always the American dream. I mean, and the fact that
that accelerated, you can become rich in the next 20 seconds.
Well, 20 seconds lately with computerized investment.
Right. It used to be 40 seconds.
Maybe it took 20 hours in the 1920.
Right.
But that always was the American dream. And you see, in places like England, for example, that was never the case, because if you were not of a certain class, you were not going to get rich. Period. That was it. I mean, there was a class structure, and America was the dream. In America was that the class structure had been destroyed and dissolved, and therefore anybody could be rich. And in America, to be rich was to be elite. That was the aristocracy. It was an aristocracy of money. And that meant it was available to everybody. But in England, of course, if you were not born to the aristocracy, there was no way you could get there. It was just over.
Do you think people still believe that in America?
Or
in North America,
I wonder.
We can include ourselves.
Yes, I actually think they do, because they see stories about Facebook, and they see about somebody becoming a billionaire in his 20s, just playing with his computer. So I actually do think that they still believe that somewhere in America. Of course, there are levels. There are levels in which it was never believed. There's always been a hopelessness in a certain segment of society in America, hopelessness, and yet even there, suddenly somebody from a ghetto breaks through as a rap artist, and suddenly he's got his gold-plated limo.
It's always such a pleasure to talk to you. Before I let you go, let me ask you a little bit about Cannes and your family.
Sure.
This was a special year for you at Cannes. You and your son Brandon became the first father-son duo to simultaneously screen films there during the festival.
Yeah.
You were there with Brandon. We know that famously to a certain extent at this point already, because of the media reports and images that were coming out of Cannes.
Some of them shot by
your
daughter.
daughter, Caitlin.
Yes.
I was going to say that it was a family affair. What was that like for you?
Fantastic. I mean, a dream come true, and it made it, sort of the Cronenberg family vacation in Cannes or something. It was amazing to see Brandon go up the red carpet and suffer, and also be exhilarated by the same things that I've experienced. I didn't really expect that ever.
Was it something you had hoped for?
I really just hope that my kids would find something that satisfied them and entertained them and intrigued them. And Brand was not. He didn't seem to be that interested in film. He was always interested in art, writing, and so on. And then suddenly he was admitting to himself that actually he did like film. I think it was it was obviously a reaction against people who thought, well, you will follow your father's footsteps.
Would you worry, as he's establishing an identity of his own as a filmmaker, do you worry about overshadowing him?
No, actually, not at all. I mean, he's got his own his sensibility, and it's very strong. He's very funny, and it turns out what's lovely and unexpected is that he's working with a lot of the people that I'm working with, not just actors like Sarah Gadden, but my production designer, the guy who did the production design of Cosmopolis, also did his film Antiviral, and Deirdre Bowen, who does my casting, has done his casting, and they can all tell me what he's like as a director, because I don't have that. I don't know what he's like as a director, and it turns out he's really, really good. So
there's the inevitable cameo at some point. You're going to have to be in one of his films.
Maybe not. I mean, frankly, I'm more likely to ask him to act in my film because he just did. He's just done a couple of interviews and he's extremely funny. And I'm thinking, hey, Brandon, he could be an actor if this directing thing doesn't work out.
It's a really compelling film, and it really is different from anything else that's out there, particularly in contemporary mainstream cinema. You've said it is difficult today to get a film like this made. This was a particularly hard film to get made. Why is that?
It's just partly it is because of the economic crisis. I guess that's ironic, really. A lot of money sources have disappeared, and of course there are businesses of every kind that complain about that. You can no longer get your dry cleaning business financed and have a line of credit because everybody's so scared and worried and nervous and all of that, and that affects the film business, which I think of us as being like the amphibians of the world, that we have such thin skin that we're really, really sensitive to any change that happens. And if there's toxicity in the environment, we are the first to experience it, in the film business, because it's not a necessary business, if you know what I mean. So a lot of sources of money have dried up. Distribution for independent films has dried up. There are very few places to go to get.
It wasn't the content of this film in particular that was.
No, I don't think so.
Some notion that if you're going to make an anti-capitalist film, that you're not going to get that funded.
No, because a really good capitalist will love an anti-capitalist film if it'll make money. So,
well said.
yeah.
I started this in the introduction saying it's been a robust year for you. Prolific would be another word. I mean, 2 major films within a year. Yeah. You seem like you're busier than ever. What are you reaching for as a filmmaker now?
It hasn't changed, really. I just things that are entertaining, amusing, interesting, provocative. I still love the joy of creation. I mean, people, talk about the difficulties of this and that, but when we're alone on the film set and we're making the movie, it's so much fun. I mean, it's just great fun when you've got, the people you love to work with, and you're creating something, and you're killing yourself laughing, and you're having a great time, and that's the way I like it on the film set. And with the actors that I had and the crew that I had for Cosmopolis, that's exactly what it was. I mean, with Paul Giamatti and Rob and me and my crew, I mean, just doing that last 22 minutes of the film on one set with those guys it was great fun. It was joyful. It was wonderful.
There's nothing more gratifying than a great artist who still loves making his art.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, there's no at that moment you have defended yourself against despair, despondency, depression. Suddenly you're just alive and you're really excited and you're really happy.
It's great to talk to you again.
Great to talk to you.
Congrats on the film.